Hi, I'm Ben, and welcome to Pause, Rewind, Play, a show about TV technology. This is going to be a series of 10 episodes interviewing some really key people within the industry. And I'm very lucky to have with me today Samuel Sweet. Today's episode will be about personalisation and content discovery. We'll talk about the challenges that exist, why this topic is important, and maybe some of what the future holds for it as well. But first of all, Samuel, do you want to talk to us a bit about yourself, your background, your experience, your expertise?
Yes. So Samuel Sweet, thanks Ben for inviting. I'm delighted to be here. Yes, I've been in the software industry for well over 25 years in various different management roles, all in tech, and the last coming up to 10 years now in discovery software, working with some very big companies that have revolutionized the way in which we look at discoverability and search on particularly in the media entertainment field.
Fantastic. And I think it's pretty fair to say we know each other quite well.
Yes.
We've worked together before. So I'm hopeful I'm going to benefit from even some of that extended experience that you've had as well in the times that we've not been working together. So let's talk a little bit, first of all, about personalisation. Let's begin with perhaps what the definition of it is, really around, because it's an often used word. It's I think sometimes is used in a bit of a throwaway manner, but we ought to spend maybe a moment just to try and provide some kind of a definition for it. And before this interview started, in my preparation for it, I was thinking about, how do you go about describing this? And for me, it's really about the tailoring of the experience. I think it's probably fair to say. And that when I say experience, I mean not just the content you consume, but the interface that you consume it through as well. And that personalization being informed by your usage, your preferences, how you interact with a service, whether you like or dislike something. And then what personalization is, like how it expresses itself within your experience. So, for example, the one often referenced example of personalization is recommendations. That's the one that I think most people will go to when they're thinking about what does personalization look like in TV. It can also be things like profiles. So where a user sets and customizes elements of their experience as well. There's all of these various facets to it, I think. But I'd be very interested, first of all, just to get your initial thoughts and insights, your views, how you would maybe explain or articulate personalization to someone that is wanting to learn about it, or maybe has experienced it but doesn't or hasn't thought about what goes on behind the scenes. What would your initial thoughts be? Yeah,
look, I think you've summarized it well. Personalization is not purely recommendations. It's the whole experience of getting content, media, infotainment to a user based on their preferences and tastes. And I think you've summarized that broad view, which is very important, because when you're talking about personalization, there's so many aspects to how to deliver that experience. Obviously, I think one of the key aspects or discussions around personalization is how much is it driven by artificial intelligence and how much is it driven by human intelligence? Because of course, you have a combination of both.
Yeah, that's I think a really nice opener and way to look at it. So, one thing we were talking about as we were preparing this episode was there's kind of almost two sides to it as well. There's what the user's experience of it is, and hopefully the benefits they get from it. And then there's the benefits on the business side as well. So I think it'd be good maybe, initially where we can reflect upon how does it benefit the user and how does it benefit the business, the operator of the service that the user is consuming content from. And, we like to think and hope and believe that for a user, personalization should lead to a better experience, whatever that might be, whatever metrics you might like to think about, whether it's, for example, you're going to see things that are going to be relevant to you right from the get-go. And from a business perspective, maybe that the delivering that personalized experience will lead to the user being more engaged for longer periods of time, consuming more content, getting more out of the service. I think those are kind of two things of equal consideration. And from from the work you've done and the experience you've had, I mean, where is the balance that you've seen and heard from people you've worked with, customers, what have you?
Yeah, look, I mean, it all starts with the user. I mean, we've got to get personalization right, and the user's got to be engaged with the content. And I think more and more, with so much content and so much entertainment being thrown at users, there's this whole aspect of content chaos, whole aspect of choice of content,
the sea of content,
and being able to actually engage the user and provide content that's really tailored to that user is absolutely key. And of course, there's loads of metrics that we can talk about. Obviously, over the last 10 years, I've been involved in working with businesses to really measure those metrics around engagement, around consumption, around life cycle of someone's engagement with a product or platform. We talk about NPS as one metric of being able to understand customer interest and satisfaction. So yeah, there's plenty we can unpack on this topic.
Indeed, and even just on those ways that you measure, I think you can measure qualitatively, right? You can get feedback from customers via surveys, through forums and communities. You can also do a very much more quantitative approach to things. So you can look at, for example, things like time to content. If you're serving up an experience and content within that is personalized, then it stands to reason that your time to content, your time to watching, should be that much lower. And in fact, your watch time might be longer as well, because you've been served that piece of content efficiently and effectively. And then on top of that, it's content you wanted. So you're going to watch, ideally, the whole thing or the whole series, whatever it might be. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think, for me at least, anyway, in my experience, it's a blend of the two. You need both. You need a bit of the science behind it, and a little bit of that art, that sentiment behind it as well. And I guess, from your experience with the businesses you've worked with, I would imagine you've probably found the same, or has it been that some customers, some companies are much more data centric, right? Because that is the overarching trend in the industry today, is data. But I'm really interested as to what the balance you've seen is. Yeah, look, I mean, I think we're at the start of really this personalization journey. I think it's table stakes for any business these days to be able to provide personalization. I was reading a report before we've come on this podcast where the amount of Gen Z and millennial audiences wanting personalization is nearly half of that audience. So if for example there isn't that level of personalization, up to 45-50% of millennials are turned off. So they're expecting information to be tailored to them, and of course that permeates everything that we do in the industry, whether it's delivering entertainment or media or any type of media and format. So, but it's all starting to really become more and more linked with something called first-party data. Yep. With the death of the cookie, of third-party cookies, personalization is becoming even more important, and being able to have that ability to interact with your the user or the person that's consuming your service or offering becomes even more important. And personalization and first party data start to become synonymous, because you've got to get that first party data to be able to really engage with even better content and really understand the preferences and tastes of obviously the people you're serving content to. Yeah, but it's very much that. And it's a very simple question, but what can we know? What can we know about the user and their experience, and how can we use that then to tune and optimize the service? And I think actually there's a really amazing segue into, because I was going to raise the point of what is the significance of personalization. And you've said, look, it's number one, it is table stakes, right? Everyone is out there doing it pretty much these days. Second thing is, and when you look at your audiences, certainly by age segmentation, you've got audiences that are coming into content consumption, maybe consuming it in a different way compared to perhaps traditional audiences, sat in a living room on a TV. You have now segments, age groups that are consuming on different types of devices, they're consuming different types of content, but their expectation absolutely is that it begins at personalization. In fact, it's not even a question for them. All of their content that they see is completely tailored to them.
Absolutely. And I think we see that with, again, I come back to Gen Z because this is the kind of audience that builds future generations of buyers and people who are going to be spending money on content or on subscriptions, or who are going to be advertised to. And obviously their disposable income will start to increase as they get older. So that Gen Z community is absolutely fundamentally built with personalization concepts in mind, having, as we know, a lot of the Gen Z and millennial community are actually spending I was reading recently, 20 to 30 hours a month on TikTok, YouTube. So these are really, and these are absolutely personalization centric services. Yeah. That really focus on delivering algorithms that are tuned to actually understanding what that eyeball or what that consumer is looking to consume.
So could we go so far as to say, if you're operating a service that is about providing content to direct to customers, that you need this to survive? I mean, that is, it's not just necessarily even just table stakes, because we can make a more extreme statement and say, without this, you don't make it. Right? You may have a massive catalog of content, really great stuff, but without some way to really efficiently get it to users, meaning personalization, you don't make it. Could we go as far as that, perhaps, do you think? Absolutely.
I think, personalization drives the stickiness of the customer to that service or to that offering. It helps manage churn. And there's all different aspects, from the recommendations and suggestions you serve to the user experience that you provide and making sure that, and to the medium you provide it in. So there's so many different aspects to it that it becomes absolutely table stakes in terms of the strategy of most businesses in the world today looking at. And of course, then we have the advent of more and more deeper learning with artificial intelligence. There's concepts of artificial general intelligence that could in the future impact how we look at personalization.
We'll come to futures in a moment. But let's change gear for a minute and let's look at content discovery. And let's take this maybe from two aspects. Let's do challenges and solutions. And maybe we'll start with a little bit around understanding or defining maybe a micro definition of content discovery, how users essentially get to what they want to watch. And in my my cue cards, in my notes, I wrote down browsing, right? Just moving, navigating around a user interface, searching for content, and whether it's that classic kind of text type or whether you're using voice, but some form of search. Both of those being, in a way, lean forward approaches for a customer to find something, or a user or a consumer to find something. And then you've got those mechanisms that are used to, from a service side, push content to the user. So we talked about recommendations, whether editorially you want to promote something, but there are lots of ways you can discover content, either by finding it or having it presented proactively to you. And so that's maybe a bit about what is content discovery. But let's talk about, and because this is the more interesting part, I think, what are some of the challenges around content discovery in today's, we have a vast content landscape. So what do you think maybe a couple of the challenges that exist are, both for users and also for service providers? Yeah.
I mean, one of the big challenges is, of course, the content that we want to consume is typically split and licensed amongst different companies that either own or produce that content and have created a singular distribution channel towards that user. So you end up having to purchase different services in order to actually have that spread of content that you want to watch.
And then navigate them, right?
And then, of course, navigation. So, of course, that creates the extra challenge of figuring out, okay, how do you create that perfect user experience that allows you to navigate all of these different content services to get to the content you want to watch? And I still think that we're still early days on that.
In solving it.
In solving it. So we talk about sort of aggregation or super aggregation, which is this concept of being able to take multiple services, whether that's, Prime and YouTube and Netflix and Disney, and bring it together in a way of being able to deliver that media entertainment experience that's seamless across all of those different owners of content whose content we want to watch, because of course they've all got aspects of their content catalog that's also that is interesting. So that's one of the obviously challenges that we're trying to solve in the industry. And I think also time, because what's happening with particularly if we look at the next generation of content consumers, Gen Z, the sort of 12 to 27-year-old category, they're spending 2-3 hours, 4 hours a day elsewhere in a completely different ecosystem. So bringing and engaging that audience and bring them back to your service or to your platform is one of the key considerations now in terms of how to define a very good personalization strategy.
It's such a good point. I was thinking, a nod towards maybe some of the older folks amongst us, but also, for folks that are using some of this existing tooling I talked about, the navigation and the browsing, is this just this idea of discovery fatigue, right? So you maybe aren't a user necessarily of one of these newer generation of services that are all about personalization right from the get-go, but you're maybe using a service that you're very happy with, your kind of traditional TV service, and you're doing your browsing, you're doing your searching, but just fatigue, just running out of gas. And, I know certainly for myself, there's been instances in the past where I've just thought, I just need to get to something and press play on it and watch it.
You're absolutely right, Ben. I think, we've got, the big complaint I have at home is my other half says to me, look, we just spend our time looking at
looking at user interfaces.
User interfaces, because you're going from one service to another, trying to find something you want to watch. And that takes time, minutes, tens of minutes to actually just go through different services, because you don't necessarily trust, even with platforms that you feel are providing you with maybe the aggregation you think that they are trying to put forward. You don't necessarily trust that they're giving you exactly what you're trying to look for. So you still end up going in to navigate to the specific individual subscription services or AVOD services to be able to look at, what's new and exciting to watch.
Hello. I hope you're enjoying the conversation in today's episode. I just wanted to take a moment to say a huge, huge thank you to Spicy Mango, who are our Series 1 sponsor. If you're looking to build global scale media and digital publishing platforms, Spicy Mango bring that serious expertise. They dig deep, they look at your business goals, and they ensure technology actually does what it should do in order to drive growth and remain cost effective. You can get in touch with them at spicymango.co.uk. With that, let's get back to the episode.
How do you program for all of the different ways that users might want to discover content, right? So some users have a particular, and I'm sure you and I definitely do, a particular way that they like to get into the UI and a particular route they like to take. And, you might imagine that you create almost like a honeycomb structure where never mind which avenue or which direction you take, eventually you find your way to the end goal. And actually, because people like to do things in different ways, some people use voice as the navigation and content search as their dominant way of finding content. Other folks love a remote control, and other folks maybe do something on an app and push it to the TV, and there are 100 other ways too. But just this idea that you need to build in some way for all of them, or at least give people options, because everyone's different. Everyone likes to find things in different ways. And there may be, it might be that long tail effect as well, where a couple of those mechanisms are the ones that are used by most people. But the tail off isn't actually that dramatic, and there are then your second or third or fourth tranche of users that have their own ways, and you want to be able to support those too. But just the time spent and the effort in managing those different pathways and making them all cohesive and continuous in the extent that, as software updates over time, as you continue to operate the service, you don't dead end any of those, either necessarily purposely or even worse, without realizing. I think we've all used, and I'm not just talking about TV here, but web interfaces and your various mobile apps where you did things a certain way for the longest time. You're very happy doing it too, and then something changes subtly or very overtly in the interface, and suddenly the thing you used to like doing to get you to the place you wanted to go doesn't work anymore.
Absolutely. Discontinuous innovation. Yeah. That's what it's all about. Disrupting, sometimes these platforms or these, user experiences are, as you said, disrupted in new releases, and you're having to relearn a whole way of doing things. Or if you want to move from one platform to another, as we know with different sort of mobile computing on mobile platforms, there's a learning curve in order to do that. So they certainly want to try and keep you in that ecosystem. And
it can have quite, I think then, back to the users, it can have quite a potentially jarring effect where if you don't think deeply about those pathways and how do you maintain them or how do you evolve them, that for users, the effect of that pathway they were used to, that route they used to take being suddenly dead-ended or not being there anymore is jarring to the extent where, I think this is the nightmare scenario for all content and service providers, that people become disengaged, right? They can't do the thing they wanted to do, that got them to the place they wanted to get to, and suddenly that is not just annoying for them. It doesn't just create friction, it creates disengagement, which is obviously, for service providers, what you don't want. And as a user is that very deeply felt frustration of, I just wanted to do the thing and now I can't do the thing. So yeah, I think we can see lots of challenges on the business side of things, and we can see lots of challenges for users. Let's think about solutions and trending and maybe a bit of kind of future direction. Where and we'll get to futures, but just in terms of trends, where do you think, from a technology and experience perspective, where do you think we're beginning to head? Like you mentioned about table stakes before. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah. As I said, personalization is now table stakes.
Yep.
I think the thinking is, how much does kind of artificial intelligence play a role in how we personalize user experiences? How much does human intelligence play a role in and there's different schools of thought. The combination of both, we call this algotorial, algorithms and editorial, is kind of the right mix.
Yeah.
Because you need a combination of both to be able to really stay in context and make sure you're giving the best experience to the people you're serving, the audiences and viewers you're serving. So that's one aspect of it. I think the way the market will evolve, I mean, I touched on it a little bit before in terms of, as we see the evolution of, deeper learning models with artificial intelligence, with AI, with generative AI, and as we move towards kind of artificial general intelligence, and the whole idea is today we have weak or what's called narrow AI, which is effectively task specific, and then as we go towards more advanced models that we see that are being developed, and there's a huge amount of investment going into these advanced models, we'll see much more reasoning, much deeper learning, the ability to look at, much bigger data sets to be able to drive, even more richer experience or automation. And I think that's what we see is happening as the market will evolve. I think we'll see more and more automation and more of these models becoming, more and more intelligent to be able to actually predict user behavior. And I think predicting user behavior is already something I'm working with one company that's looking at predicting and profiling individuals or households based on their viewing habits and viewing behavior, and giving those individuals and households a score that allows you to kind of start to understand from that viewing or behavioral habits what they're looking to consume in the future, and then make adjustments in terms of both your, what you serve them as content, but also what ads and advertising you provide to them. And I think the other aspect is we tend to look too much at building up scale. I think there was an article I read recently where to have a truly successful offering, you just need 1,000 true fans. And when I mean true fans, it's people who buy someone's album, goes religiously to that person's concerts.
That are fanatical.
And of course, if you can really appeal to those audiences, you really start to build micro communities of real loyalty around your service, around your content offering. Yeah,
and then maybe they point to or show you the North Star early on, right? They give us more of this because we really extremely like it, and actually maybe that, like I said, orientates you as to that's what we should be doing perhaps more of. Not that it's not that it's only that community or group you're serving, but maybe they're helping to guide and show the direction. And I think that's a lot, I think, there on technology and approach. I think when I look at it from, again, back to the user, like how do we think about it for the user? This idea of a tailored and dynamic, not just presentation of content, but the actual interface itself. Like how might that interface metamorphose, adjust, alter itself in order to get you to where you want to go to quickly. I talked about that kind of honeycomb of different routes that you could take. if you have an interface that can adapt itself based on that. And I think for some people, that's quite a scary thought almost of like, what do you mean it's going to change as I use it? Well, yeah, but it will do it in a way that is subtle and that will tune itself to the way that you like to do things. And I think that's I think the technology backbone to that is an interesting conversation. I think the experiential side from a user perspective is really fascinating too, because interfaces, as we talked about before, tend often to remain quite similar. Like the paradigm that's there for the user interface has historically been quite static, but going forward, I think my sense is that that's going to alter dramatically too. And we're going to see, when we've already got some apps and services that are all video as the interface, and we've got in the past interfaces that are very static, and I wonder whether we're going to see a very fascinating evolution of the experience for user and the interface that they use. But I guess with all of this, and we won't dwell for too long on it, but we have to have that consideration towards privacy as well, right? Because a lot of this evolution will be fueled by data, like you say, first-party data, where you know what your user's doing. And I think that's something that all of these services are going to have in mind as well, is just how do they do all of this, but with privacy front and center as well, because that is an expectation of I think now many people, at least maybe not an expectation, but certainly there's an awareness of it, if nothing else. Do you have any views on that?
Look, you're spot on. Adaptive user interface or adaptive experiences, dynamic experiences, individualized experiences can only work if they're tied intrinsically to first-party data, to what you understand of that user. And of course, you create that trust relationship when you start to provide personalization that's relevant, that's contextual, that really does meet the preferences of the person that's consuming that piece of content. So that's and of course, privacy plays an important role in that, because of course, as privacy becomes more of a concern, having that trusted relationship and having that access to that you earn the trust to have that person's first-party data to create those engaging experiences becomes really the next real key strategic objective, I think, of a lot of the businesses out there.
Yeah, trust. I think I think you nailed it with that one word. Trust is absolutely at the core of it. So let's move onward into a bit more of the future. Here we can kind of do a bit of as you would call it, blue sky thinking, a bit of gazing into the future. We can kind of take a view on what we think the evolution of personalization might look like in the next 5 to 10 years. We would be remiss to not talk about AI and to talk about a little bit about Gen AI as well, because it gets mentioned in every conversation these days, but also because, and I think the thing for me when I was thinking about the preparation for this was, if you had to pick out one characteristic about AI at the moment, not necessarily in what it can deliver, but what would be the one characteristic you'd pick out? And the characteristic I would focus on would be just the cycle rate, the turnover rate of generations that we're seeing at the moment. It is, I can't think of anything like it in my professional career where something is iterated so quickly. We are almost across the various well-known competing services now, I'm going to say monthly and possibly even weekly rate of increment across. If you take, say, the top 5 that are often spoke about, it is almost weekly iteration. So much so that it's almost hard to keep up with as to which is the most performant model. What can the newest new models do? And it's quite astonishing. And I think the focus on Gen AI at the moment is also heavily around content creation, which is an interesting aspect for us to talk about, because suddenly anyone can make somewhat reasonable looking videos, depending on what your definition of reasonable is. But back to that characteristic, the cycle rate. Have you ever seen anything that is iterating and progressing at the rate that this is?
I think it's incredible. I agree. The rapid rate of iteration. I think the different approaches as well is quite interesting as to how certain companies are approaching it, whether it's open source or closed source approaches to the future. And it's obviously changing radically every industry. Obviously we're talking about media entertainment, but if you look at business process automation, you have companies in that leading companies in that segment who are building from the bottom up. Obviously their platforms are built around kind of AI layers and and AI foundation models. If you look at most recently the property business, digital, in terms of how the property business is evolving, leaders in that market are actually building AI layers into their software platforms. So it's permeating every single kind of vertical. There's obviously lots of talk about healthcare and how that can be revolutionized with much deeper learning and what we see with the advancements in terms of artificial intelligence. So yeah, it's definitely iterating at incredible speed.
Yeah, and back to that point that we made, a lot of this is cyclic, right? But back to that point we made about data. I mean, these models require vast amounts of data. I mean, literally, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was talking about this kind of the rate of scale of increase of data being consumed, and the idea of like almost running out of data, which is astonishing to me. Like the where we're at in terms of the parameters that these models are at now. We're in tens and tens of billions of parameters already, and the idea that we could almost be hamstrung on the evolution of some of these models by the fact that we don't have enough, in inverted commas, data for them to consume is, again, it's an astonishing thing. Like, what do you mean we're going to run out of data? That's ridiculous. No, it's a reality that's often being discussed now. So I think when we talk about predictions for the future, the AI and specifically Gen AI part is really interesting. The aspect of data that comes with that is interesting. We talked about privacy. That's interesting. That's why I referred to this kind of this cycle here, is that it's going to be really, over the next 5 to 10 years, just so interesting to see where we get to. And then, back to our topic for today, how that drives personalization and how it drives content discovery too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some interesting user cases that I've had the privilege of working at the moment around generative AI to look at, for example, using generative AI to query what's relevant and what's trending topics in a specific country or region, and then matching that with a content catalog and serving up content that's specific to those 2 or 3 kind of macro trends. Whether that's US presidential elections, whether that's Paralympics and disability and some of the Paralympic sports we've seen recently, and matching that in terms of content. Those are interesting sort of concepts being looked at today in terms of creating much more engaging experiences. The other being sports engagement. Obviously, I think we're still going to consume very much live sports. We're still going to be big consumers of live sports, and being able to use what's happening and interact with live entertainment, broadcast entertainment, and being able to actually, again, coming back to adaptive user experiences, use that to infuse experiences, giving it a much more individual view and taste would be also something topical at the moment.
And that's a great landing point as well, because the last thing I wanted to touch on here was how this all dovetails around to outcomes for viewers, for consumers, for your viewing experience. And I think there's a balance to be found, right, between, I guess it's this on-off ramp between having something that gives you a diverse content diet, call it that for want of a better word, and at the same time matching that with a more laser-like focus on the stuff you really want. And you need a balance, right? You've got this should be the goal of really great personalization and content discoveries, that you get a bit of both, right? And I think that the idea and the hope is that these advancements in technology lead to great outcomes for consumers, for users, for viewers, and that they'll get to see a bit of both of these, because you don't want a sort of echo chamber of the same stuff that you've always known and engaged with, and only that. At the same time, you don't want to be swimming in the sea of content forever in a really diverse range. Maybe you'd like a mix. And my hope is, I guess, for all of this, is that where we land with some of this evolution is that we get a great balance or blend of those two.
Absolutely, and that's the big opportunity for the future, is trying to do that effectively. And of course, all of that comes down to be able to understand what people want, what they want to watch, what they 100%. Want to consume, what they want to spend their time on, and of course, understanding that through like those first-party data experiences are, I think, absolutely key.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's got us towards the end of this episode. We've talked about the importance of personalization, challenges and opportunities of content discovery. We talked about a bit about maybe future direction. Are there any final thoughts you have, final insights, anything that sort of comes to mind as, I don't know, if I was to think about these topic, I would have this in mind specifically? Anything that particularly, or maybe something that we've covered off in the episode that you want to re-highlight and say, I'd love a day where I'm not spending so much time trying to find something to watch, because there's so much choice, and have something that is a much more integrated experience. I think that's where it would be a nice kind of incremental step to get to. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much, Samuel, for your time. I think it's a really fascinating discussion. I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you've managed to stay through to the end of this episode, well done. If you want to subscribe, please do. It's pause, rewind, play. If you want to drop a like, that'd be super as well. And I think, like with all these things, when you're talking tech, as we are, it's often good to pause, rewind, and play.